So we come to the 18th chapter of this series on the Mass in slow motion. It's the washing of the priest's hands. There is, not a whole lot to say here. It's a fairly brief thing to take note of, but it had originally a practical purpose, but it's always had a spiritual connotation as well. Now, in the vesting prayers, all the way back in the sacristy before the priest even began Mass, there's a special prayer assigned to the washing of his hands. In effect, the priest asked the Lord to wash away the stain of his sins, that he may worthily celebrate the sacred liturgy. And so that's said back in the sacristy. Then, well, why is he washing his hands again here? What's the purpose of that? Historically, there were actually a large number of things that were brought up, in the offertory procession. More than just bread and wine. There would often be other types of, we largely live in a cash or, plastic economy where money is exchanged. But in the ancient world, and in some places today still, there's a lot of what we might call more of a barter economy, where goods like, bushels of corn or some things. Even I remember a priest friend of mine, I was staying with him in the in the Midwest for a couple of weeks, and among the things he would get in his collection was like a slip of paper saying, I want to donate or dedicate 2 cows, and the income I get from them to the parish income. And so once those cows were taken to the market, so to speak, that money would be given. So there was a kind of a barter economy that meant that some things were actually brought over to the church, like corn or wheat or barley or other things that could be thought of as an offering. And the priest would, in collecting these things, would often, these things might be dirty or what have you, and so it would make sense that he'd have to wash his hands after the offertory procession. So a lot of people describe that. Now, it wasn't about, when we talk about washing our hands before meals and so on today, we're thinking of bacteria, and they didn't really have much of a notion of that. But the hands could be literally dirty, some dirt on them that needed to be cleansed away. And so there was a kind of a practical thing at the offertory that then began to be spiritualized, that this washing of the hands, simply because maybe they were dirty, but it was also an idea that I need to ask the Lord to wash away my iniquities and cleanse me of my sins. And that's the prayer that the priest says. He prays, Lord, wash away my iniquity and cleanse me of my sins. There's a little joke that sometimes goes around that only altar servers or priests would really understand it, but that phrase, Lord, wash away my iniquity and cleanse me of my sins. So there was a young boy who didn't want to leave town with his family because it was a small little country church, and he was really the only altar boy or the only altar server, and so he didn't want to go on vacation with his family, and so the father of the family said, Father, would you talk to him? He thinks that he has to be here for Mass. And so the priest said, well, Johnny, I want you to know that I can go ahead, and it's good to have you here, but I can celebrate Mass, without you present. He said, but Father, if I'm not here, who will wash away your iniquities? All right. So, a little inside joke. But the washing of the hands is something here which is, even at the beginning when it still had a kind of a practical purpose, even then it was spiritualized. And this even goes back to Jewish times. It was a very ancient practice among the Jews that prescribed many ritual sorts of washings. Again, they knew nothing of bacteria and other things like this, but jugs and cups and kettles and beds and all these different things had to be washed. Things that came from the market all had to be washed. It was more of a ritual cleansing of these things to render them fit for the people of God. Again, there is this, it's always been a spiritual understanding of the washing of not just of the priest's hands, but of all sorts of other spiritual washings and things that were done among the Jewish people. And some of this thinking was brought right into the church. So yes, there was a practical, the priest might need to wash his hand after handling a lot of things that were brought up in the offertory, but at the end of the day, it was spiritualized right from the beginning to mean that it was important once again to just be reminded, I'm a sinner, and I'm about to offer now literally, as I turn back to the altar, the holy sacrifice of the Mass. And I, as a sinner, just ask you one more time, Lord, remove from me the stain of my sins, so that I may offer this worthily unto you as your servant. So basically, that's what we want to say about the washing of the priest's hands. It is a brief moment, but it is an important moment. Now, by the way, I sometimes hear people say to me, well, in our parish, the priest just skips that. Or if there isn't an altar server, he just skips that. Well, he's not supposed to skip it. Okay? It's not like an optional part of the liturgy. It's not as though, he's just free to omit it. Even if there isn't an altar server, the usual practice is to have a little bowl, you dip your fingers and you dry them. This should be done. It's not something that is easily eliminated. It is wrong for priests to eliminate these things. And so, as I say, if the priest knows he's not going to have a server, he should have some kind of way, a little bowl to dip his fingers, or some provision where he can wash his hands. And it's important to stick to the liturgy. And it's a sign of humility. And it's kind of doubly prideful to not just omit something you're required to do, but to omit something that is a sign of humility. It's kind of a double pride involved there. So again, while there may be at times understandable if the priest turns and realizes that the altar server has wandered off somewhere, as they sometimes do, gone into the sacristy, and he turns and there's no one there, well, maybe it's okay to turn back in a moment like that. But to intentionally eliminate this, no, that shouldn't be done. And I hope that and if I know any of my brother priests that do it, I would certainly say, Father, you really ought to do it. Okay, well, blessings now. So we'll continue on. We're coming to a crucial moment in the Mass now, where the priest will now invite the whole congregation to stand as we begin the great liturgy of the Eucharist, and we'll talk about that in the very next video.